computer is crap, and so it might be many more moons until you see another one. However, I was on Facebook today, and the top trending story was Reynolds High School shooter dead, and so that immediately piqued my interest. This is the first article I read here, and I'll just give you a rundown, in case you haven't heard of it, of what the initial facts and official facts are so far. So, the shooter apparently had military garb on, a vest and a helmet, much like many of the shooters we've seen in the past. He also shot with an assault rifle. Same deal, many of the shooters in the past have used an assault rifle. There was a single shooter, and this has been reiterated many times up until the most recent press conference at noon. One student died, and one staff, Todd Rispler, a PE teacher, was injured. The PA system came on when the shooting happened and informed the children that this is not a drill. They had actually been doing many dry run drills in the past months before this. The students were taken away from the school by the SWAT team. They were cleared out of the school by the SWAT team and brought to Fred Meyer's, which was the staging area. At Fred Meyer's, the kids would line up, and the parents in this large group that I'll show you here, this huge group of parents, just thousands and thousands of people deep, would raise their hand when they saw their kid, and that's how they matched them up with each other. The school had 2 liaison officers who were on duty, and they were, for all intents and purposes, the first responders to the scene. One thing that's kind of interesting is that the Vancouver police, which is obviously Canadian across the Oregon border, showed up to this shooting as well. And I thought that was interesting because we know officially that only one student died and one staff was injured, and then the shooter, one shooter, is also dead. So to me, that just seemed like a kind of a small deal scenario when you already have SWAT team and multiple police agencies on site to bring a Canadian law force now down to help. But maybe they were just quick responders, or who knows. And let me just say before I get too far into this video that I often title my videos Hoax, but that doesn't mean necessarily that I believe that it's a hoax. Using that term oftentimes brings in people that would not necessarily think this way towards a situation like this. And the way I present it, I try to be as non-attacking as possible because I can never say for sure that something is or is not a conspiracy, because based on the nature of conspiracy, I would never know if it was, and if it wasn't, it's none of my business to be sticking my nose into other people's grief. So now we've moved on from the official story, and we're going to go into some witnesses that I have here. Now, most of these witnesses were teenagers, and I'm assuming that a lot of the information they got was kind of hearsay, because that's how information travels through high schools. However, I think that they're, at this time, the most credible people that we can talk to, and I, in fact, have emailed dozens of students on Facebook to try to speak with them about this incident. I heard back from one, and I'll get to that later. Okay, the first person I have is Tate Blaylock. And I watched all of these children do interviews live as well, but I went back and tried to find then articles about them because I couldn't record it at that time. So Tate Blaylock heard 2 shots and saw people running and screaming. He said he was going to 7th period. And I don't know if this high school just works differently, but if you're going to 7th period, maybe he said 2nd, but I listened to it a couple times and I'm pretty sure he said 7th. But that would be just strange to be going to 7th period, because that means the school probably does them backwards from 7 to 1, and I've never heard of a school. That doesn't mean that they don't exist, but I've never personally heard of a school that goes backwards like that. And again, he could have been saying 2nd period, which makes a little more sense time-wise, so that could just be my misunderstanding. This article states the student, Tate Blaylock, said he also heard shots and even witnessed a shooter who he said was male and was not covering his face. So he heard shots and saw a shooter. He could not say who the shooter was, but said the second gunman was arrested after students were searched. That is another interesting fact that I'll bring up throughout these different witnesses as well. So he talking about this boy, so I'll just tell you a little bit about the second gunman. Now, the children were taken out by SWAT teams, and they were patted down when they were evacuated. Now, in one of the groups, one of the students admitted that he wasn't part of the school, and when he was patted down, they found a gun on him. Now, in the press conferences. They're claiming over and over that this was not related to this incident. This was just somebody else with a gun. But a lot of the kids were really scared by it. Even this Tate says he was sitting there like a normal kid, and so they were worried because he was just sitting in the group like everything was fine and didn't mention or bring up anything about the fact that he also had a gun on him at that time. Moving on. There was a boy named Tyler. I wasn't actually able to find an article about him, but he heard loud noises and screams, and verbatim he said, "One followed us, I guess." He is also referring to the man who was found in their group that had a gun on him. He was in the evacuation group where they had found him with a gun. He described hearing at least 6 gunshots. He said that there was 1 shooter dead, 1 in his group from the evacuation, and that he actually physically saw 3 or 4 people total, not police officers, not SWAT, with guns running in the hallway. I couldn't find an article with him in it, unfortunately. Then we move on to Jamie Infante. She heard yelling and loud noise in the gym, and she thought it was nothing because it was coming from the gym, so they just assumed that that was no big deal. And here's a little bit about her father. Jesse Infante was home in Troutdale on Tuesday morning when he received a text from his daughter, Jamie, saying only a shooting. About a minute or 2 later, she fired off another text, "Teacher shot." So this to me entails that she either had heard about or had witnessed Todd Rispler's injuries. So now we have Jacob Saldana, and I actually have a video clip of him. I'll link you to all of this as well, so you can go listen to this interview. I actually had to record them with a microphone from my laptop, so they didn't get recorded very well, but if you listen with your speaker or with your headphones in, it sounds pretty clear. You can tell what they're saying at least. So Jacob Saldana was also in that group where someone with a gun was found, and he, in this article, is talking about how he also witnessed Todd Rispler injured, and he actually saw him bleeding and was like, wow, this is for real now, I can't believe this is happening. But yeah, I would listen to his clip because he talks about how the man said, "I'm not part of this school," and they immediately patted him and found a gun. And my question is, if he wasn't part of the school, how did he end up there? And it's eerily similar to the extra shooter in Sandy Hook that was running through the woods, and no big deal, you know, no big deal that he seems to be in camouflage and have a gun. He's totally unrelated to this shooting that happened. So I thought that was really an interesting fact. And now I'll go to, as I said, I contacted many of the students, as many as I could, on Facebook. The only problem with that is that if you're not friends with somebody, it goes to a folder called Other, and not many people look there. But I did see this boy on the news, and I also I'm sorry, I saw this boy on the news, and so I friended him on Facebook and was able to talk to him a little bit for his own safety and security. I'm not sure, I don't think you guys would hurt him, but I just don't want him to be bombarded with a bunch of different people asking him questions. But here is his rundown. I asked him to explain to me what he felt and what he saw. Well, there's a lot of grammatical and spelling errors, so I'll just kind of give you a rundown after I read it verbatim. Well, I was walking in the hallway. I had headphones in and didn't hear any gunshots, but I was in the lunchroom, and seeing everyone run in, I was in the lunchroom for another 3 minutes. Then I walked outside to the theater building and was talking to my girlfriend because he was in the building, and then an SMT came and said get somewhere safe, and there were 2 other kids with me, went inside, and then I was locked out and stood out there for a good 15 minutes, then ran and saw my girlfriend's dad. Then stood outside close to the school for an hour, and my mom worked at Safeway next to the school, so I went to check in with my mom, and she was bawling. Then I went to Fred Meyer's to make sure my girlfriend was okay, and I'm not really okay. And so I just told him I wasn't a reporter, so he explained that's not a big deal. So basically, what this boy experienced was that he was in the cafeteria, he had his headphones in, so he didn't hear any gunshots, but he saw people running for about 3 minutes, and after that happened, he had actually gone to the theater building, which was a separate building outside, to find his girlfriend. At that point, a teacher had come out and said, you need to find somewhere safe to go. So he and his girlfriend try to go back inside, and they can't, so they're locked out. So he wasn't actually anywhere near the shooter. A couple things I find interesting are that, one, I thought that all of the students were contained and put on the buses and brought to Fred Meyer's because that is how they were handling things. But it sounds like this boy, and maybe it could be that they knew that she was working at Safeway, but it sounds like, well, one, her girlfriend's dad somehow managed to get to the school before all of this, before the staging area had been set up and everything. But two, that they just kind of let him walk around, walk to Safeway, walk back to the school, go to Fred Meyer. So he was kind of all over the place, and it seems like they didn't really have a good handle on where he was located. So that is the first message I got from him. And we'll move on. And the second message I got from him, at this point I just said, you know, well, what were you feeling? What did you think had happened? And so he basically says, I didn't know what was going on. I thought everyone was running because it's the first day of finals. And yeah, the theater is in a separate building. And yeah, I was stuck outside. And yeah, I don't really have friends there. I mostly just hang out with my girlfriend. So I asked him if he had known, or if all of his loved ones were okay, and that's what he was saying. Yeah, everyone's fine. I don't really talk to people there. So then I asked him again. I said, you know, some people are confused. They think they saw multiple gunmen and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. He says, I didn't know what was going on. Oops, whoops, that's the exact same one I just read to you. My mistake. So we'll go back to this one. So he says here, no problem. There were 3 shooters. One was 20, I think, and he died. And I think the other 2 ran, and one got caught. A kid died, and one of the gym teachers got grazed by a bullet in the thigh. So this kid, and like we saw, he wasn't anywhere near the shooter. However, he has to know a lot of the people that were actually close to it. And I understand this could be a case of childhood telephone, where it starts at one end and ends up terribly misconstrued by the end. But it could also be an instance of the kids saw more than what is actually being reported. So take that with a grain of salt, because we're not really sure. It's just one of the children's ideas and one of his outlooks on it. So now going forward, we know that many times when something like this happens, there has been a drill close to that area and within the vicinity of just a few months. And this is true in a couple of different ways for this instance. First of all, the school had been running, special drills, they called them dry runs, for this type of incident in the past couple months. And that means a full lockdown and shooter scenario and things like that. And so that's, I think, one of the main reasons that the PA had announced right in the beginning that it was not a drill, because so many kids have been drilling for this exact thing that they weren't sure if it was real or not. The other thing that is interesting is that on April 26th, a school in Halfway, Oregon, named Pine Eagle Charter School, held an active shooter drill. Here's another article about it. The thing that was so shocking and interesting, and why this specific drill made headlines, was because they failed miserably. They did everything wrong, and out of all of the people that had been involved, out of all of the faculty, only 2 of the 15 actually would have survived. And I listened to a couple of the people who had participated, and they said, yeah, I got shot in the front and the back. I did a really bad job. And so they just did terrible. It was almost laughable how badly they dealt with this. So this is a huge embarrassment for them. Now, this drill that was conducted is 5.5 or so hours away from Reynolds High School. So you'd think, okay, well, it's probably not related because that's an incredible distance, you know. But I started reading further, and it sounds like it is part of the so-called, so we're talking about Halfway, where the Pine Charter, whatever it was called, Pine Eagle Charter School, this is the one that failed the test in Halfway, Oregon, is part of a so-called SERVA, or School Emergency Response and Recovery Alliance, consisting of 8 school districts, 2 community colleges, and emergency responders in this county: Portland, Gresham, Fairview, and Troutdale. Now, if you've been following the news, you would find this to be interesting because Reynolds High School is in Troutdale. So that means that these drills could possibly be connected, because we have a terribly botched drill that happens in Oregon in Halfway, and then a couple of months later, in the same alliance, we have a real shooting of one of the high schools. So this is just another article on it. That's something interesting I think that you should read into as well, just because it's such a strange coincidence. Along the same lines of drills, we all know that they've been conducting them for quite a while now. However, one thing is changing, and that's the fact that they are starting to not tell people when these drills are happening. This actually just occurred here in Denver recently. They did a mall drill, and they didn't tell anybody that it was going to be happening. So all of these people, all of these customers that were shopping at the mall were just traumatized because they couldn't believe this happened. That happened at the Minnesota Zoo. My friend was recently there, and they told her, you know, this is an emergency, get down, and then come to find out that was also a drill. So the element of shock and surprise has become more of a value to these drills, and so much so that this drill was conducted, a specific shooter drill in Okaloosa County, Florida, and basically what happened is that they didn't tell anybody that they were going to be doing this drill, and so people reacted as if it was a real drill, and afterwards were just scarred and in shambles and a complete mess, to the point that a lawsuit is pending against the Florida Department of Health because it was so scary for them that they find it unacceptable that they would conduct themselves in this way. So I think that's crazy to think about, because now we have drills that are being conducted without consent of the people before they're happening, and could this be related to that? Possibly. Possibly not, though. Alright, so now I will get into all these pictures that I took earlier. I was watching it happen live for many hours, and I wanted to try to get as many good pictures as I could, because live recording just isn't working very well for me right now. So I'll just kind of go over them picture by picture here. The first picture I have is of the parents, as I was telling you. Now, what I find interesting about this circumstance, and not these people in particular, but is that I saw a lot of crying, but it wasn't ever from the students. The students were in good spirits. They seemed fine. They didn't seem afraid. But the parents were very scared. And the reason for this is the media. These kids that actually experienced this know the level of terror that happened, which by their faces seems like it was not much. The parents are learning of this through the media. So not only is it being emphasized and dramatized, but it's being presented to them in a less than factual way as well. So, as you can imagine, if you were to find out from the news that your child was in a place of danger, your mind would go wild. So, we see people actually experiencing it, not being afraid. People who are hearing about the incident and how sad and nightmarish it could be are very afraid, which is an interesting dynamic. Now, this particular picture is, well, the caption says it, parents lined up at Fred Meyer waiting for students. Now, there's a couple things I find interesting about this. So as this picture is on the screen, the newscaster is overlaying, saying things like, oh, grief-stricken parents are so fearful and so devastated and anxious, and words like this. When I look at this crowd, I don't see those emotions. I see, why the fuck have we been waiting for our kid for this long? I don't see, I mean, many of these people have probably already communicated with their child and know they're okay, but to me, just that overlay of them being anxious and grief-stricken is just ridiculous, because even this woman made me laugh, because as they were doing interviews in front of her, she was shaking her head like, Jesus, just get out of here, what are you doing wasting all of our time, and things like that. So the next picture I have here could be a couple of different things. It was one of the few pictures I got of people who looked like they were hurt or in getting medical care, and this person is in a wheelchair, it appears, and they are, I think, going onto this bus. They're very far from the ambulances, so to me at first I thought that they were getting treated for something, But the more I look at it, I think that maybe this is just a handicapped student that they are now transferring to Fred Meyer. But it could go either way, really. Now, if you haven't watched my previous videos and you don't know what duping delight is, I highly recommend that you read about it because it's a fascinating human phenomenon. And essentially, you've probably experienced something where you've been dishonest or been caught in a lie, and all of a sudden the first thing you want to do and your body's reaction is to let out this big smirk. And you think, oh shit, now they know that I wasn't being honest, and it just gives it away, and that's what duping delight is. When someone is being dishonest, there is this kind of internal need to smile or smirk, even giggle or chuckle sometimes. Now, this can also be confused with the regular human emotion, which is awkwardness and uncomfortability, and we laugh because we're uncomfortable. That's one of the main reasons that human beings smile and laugh. So it could be that they don't know how to deal with this situation and they just feel so awkward, and so it's just they're smiling because they can't control it. So this could be one of those two things, and there's a few different people I show that are smiling like this. So here's this woman, kind of smiling almost the entire time she's doing the interview. This was interesting. It's, again, could be for logical or conspiracy reasons. They were very clear by saying, stay away from Reynolds. Do not come to Reynolds, which, if you remember, the boy I talked to on Facebook, his girlfriend's father actually got there somehow, but they must have at some point blocked them all off, and they basically say, don't show up here. And that could be either because they want to block it off because there's not enough room, or there's an ongoing investigation and they don't want a lot of people there, or it could also be that it was staged and they don't want people to catch on or to see what actually happened. So that, again, could go either way. This woman, I can't remember her title, but she spoke at both press conferences. She exhibits also the upturning, and this is, I got kind of bad screen caps, but if you can find her press conference live, you can see the kind of upturn in the smile while she's speaking. This man was actually smiling ear to ear, big teeth grin, the entire time. They are all kind of gathering before the press conference. So again, it could just be, a moment of happiness in strife, but it could also be that I'm lying, don't catch me thing. Here she is again, either a face of grief or a face of dishonesty. It's really hard to tell at this point. Okay, so this is another example of how the students were in much greater spirits than the parents. You can even see here, very worried, very almost just uncomfortable, and he is just smiling ear to ear, no big deal, everything's fine. And then that guy must have just, his arm is up, like I said. They brought the kids out and lined them up, and they would raise their hand if that was their kid in front of them. So, in fact, one of the kids that walked by, they did kind of, while someone was speaking, they just did a shot of a father and a son walking by, and he was a young boy, and he just grins like this, big teethy smile, and waves like, I'm gonna be on TV. And then this woman, who obviously is very sick of waiting. But yeah, so just the contrast between people who have heard it from the media and people who have actually experienced it. Here's another example. This guy was also very cheery. Could be for a lot of different reasons, conspiracy and not. So just wanted to put that out there. And I think I just have maybe one more. This is a shit picture, but very interesting circumstance. This happened hours after everything had happened, and they said it was contained, and a lot of the kids were at Fred Meyer at this point. But this woman was this is the back of an ambulance. This is an open ambulance door. This is too. But this is a paramedic, and this is a woman in a pink shirt being wheeled out in a stretcher. And it was so out of place and so awkward that's why I wanted to bring it up, just because they had already apparently accounted for the one injury of Todd whatever his name was, Risperdal. I think that's a drug, Risperdal. But Todd, and the two deaths, the student and the shooter. But so who is this lady, and where does she come in? And I don't know, so I just thought that was kind of interesting. So overall, I watched CNN for many hours, and as usual, it was very overdramatic, And it even at one point showed these parents answering a phone call from their child that they hadn't heard from, and the relief that they had felt from the anxiety that they were worried that they were hurt, and all of these other things. And they use the term staging area a lot, which I understand is often used in these, but it's just such a strange colloquial usage to me of the word staging. Even at one point, they had discussed how the kids were being brought in buses, and they had erroneously thought that some buses sitting out were for the children. Then they corrected themselves and they said, oh, those buses are staged. And I still don't understand what that means. So just very interesting wording. And yeah, so at this point I don't really know what I feel about it. I think that I'm going to be watching the news, trying to figure out who it was and if there's any motive, which I bet anything that it will be a white male, and he probably won't really have a motive, and he'll probably be on some type of psychotropic drug, or has been in the past, or has had a sketchy past of some sort. But all of that is yet to be determined. So keep your eye out and use your brain whenever you see something like this, because as awful as it is to think about it, you never know when it could just be pulling the wool over our eyes or hoodwinking us, as it were. So I hope that you all enjoy this video, and if you have any information on either side, I'm more than happy to listen. If you think it really did happen, or if you think it's a conspiracy, I'm always open for discussion. So keep your eyes open and your brains working. See you next time, guys.